get us started. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'm very proud and very excited to have the opportunity to introduce Mr. Jones, the artist who created the work that you see on display in the lobby. 2001. Mr. Jones is from Columbia, South Carolina. He's been a freelance artist and illustrator all his life. His former clients have been Time Life Books, IBM, Westinghouse, NASA, I'm impressed, U.S. Postal Service. He explores life through his art. His goal is to paint the African American experience, starting with the slave trade in Africa, through the Middle Passage and pre-Civil War era, and contrast it with African Americans today. He has been largely self-taught, and in addition to the Confederate currency exhibit that's downstairs, he's painted a series on Buffalo soldiers and the 54th Massachusetts regiments. He's currently working on some projects focusing on the peoples of Gullah in the St. Helena Island of South Carolina area, as well as African Americans in the military. Please take this moment to turn your cell phones to vibrate or turn them off altogether. And please join us immediately after the lecture downstairs in the gallery for a reception. I'm very proud to introduce Mr. John W. Jones.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John W. Jones. I'm basically a self-taught artist from Columbia, South Carolina. Back when I was about 6 years old in elementary school, I drew a wagon on a blackboard in my first grade class, and the teachers realized that I could draw, and of course they took complete advantage of that. And they had me doing all their bulletin boards, and in high school, backdrop school plays and that sort of thing. And after I graduated from high school in 1968, I received a letter from the President of the United States inviting me to participate in the Vietnam conflict. In other words, I was drafted into the Army. And I spent 8 years in the military. The first couple of years I was infantry, and I eventually got my MOS changed to 81 Echo, which is an Army illustrator. And in Korea, during the bicentennial, they asked me to paint the side of the telecommunication building, put a mural on the side of the telecommunication building, which was about 30 feet tall and about 150 feet long. And I did that and barely got it finished in time for the bicentennial celebration, but I did get it finished somehow. After leaving the military in 1978, I worked as a freelance artist and illustrator in the Washington, D.C. area for about 10 years. And then I moved back to my hometown, Columbia, South Carolina. And I stayed there for about 5 years working at the University of South Carolina. Then I decided that it would be a good idea to get remarried. Well, when I got remarried, I moved to Somerville, South Carolina, and my wife said, "Son, you got to get a job." So I ended up working at a blueprint company selling and demonstrating large format printers and products. And when I was doing that, a customer of mine brought a note into me and asked me to scan the image into the computer and enlarge it for him. And when I did that, I noticed in the lower right-hand corner of one of the notes a small image of slaves in the cotton fields picking cotton. And this was one of those kind of things that kind of made you say, what's this all about? So I began to do a little investigation, and I went on the computer and started looking around on eBay, and I found that I could actually bid on a lot of these notes on eBay. Now, I'm not the first person that knew anything about Confederate money. A lot of people know about it, particularly numismatics and those that collect old currency. But I decided to take these images that I found on a Confederate currency and recreate them into paintings so that people could see what I was seeing. I was intrigued and excited by the images that I was seeing, so I started to research and document the use of slaves on Confederate and Southern states' money. And I was absolutely astonished by the widespread use of the slaves on the currencies, and even more shocked by the absence of this information in any history books. The engravings on the bills are small, and unless you're looking for them, they're very difficult to see. You miss it. So I decided to bring these engravings back to life, recreate them as full-color paintings, so to add to my series of paintings on the African American experience and from the Middle Passage and through a timeline that includes the Buffalo Soldiers and other icons of the American experience. Now, when I approached Dr. Marvin Delaney of the Avery Research Center in Charleston, South Carolina, about putting together an exhibition of these paintings, the first thing he asked me was, well, how was I going to make this exciting? Well, I told him that I was going to paint these images exactly as I saw them on the currency without revision. I've used my colorful acrylics on canvas to bring the paintings back to life and extract from the dehumanizing engravings the essential humanity of their subject matter. The paintings empowers the slaves by giving them a voice that asks us not to reflect on them as the objects in the monochrome engravings on the old currency, but rather that we join with them to confront a meaning of a system past in one sense and painfully persistent in another, system that kept them enslaved. Now, I'm partial to the narrative content of art, and I like to use my paintings to tell a story. In this collection of paintings, the paintings innocuously draw you in and free you up to confront the very difficult subject of slavery without fear of censorship. The juxtaposition of the framed Confederate currencies with the acrylic paintings inspired by the slave images that I found on these old currencies makes a very powerful statement on the contribution of enslaved Africans to the American economy. In these paintings, history informs art, which in turn reveals more history. It has sometimes been said that the history of a country is reflected in its money. Well, that was certainly true in the history of early American paper money and the depictions of African Americans that we find on these old currencies. Continent slaves were the foundations on which the economy of the South was built. They were very important properties, proudly displayed on their paper money. Slavery, obviously, was very important to the South because, after all, it's on their money. And I use this cliche all the time. It's right on the money. The engraved images show the slaves as happy, well-treated, healthy workers in a quote-unquote unnatural state of bliss. You never see anything about the darker side of slavery in any of these images, like slaves being whipped and that sort of thing. These images of slavery by the artists of that period are similar to the work of present-day photojournalists, except the positive slave images were being used as propaganda. They were designed to actively affirm and aggressively promote the slave labor system of their plantation economy. Very few people are aware that in the 1800s, during the quote-unquote free banking era, lax federal and state banking laws allowed almost anyone, states, private banks, railroad companies, stores, and even individuals, to issue currency. Banknotes were made of different sizes, and different shapes, and different colors, and different designs. The notes of the same denomination had different values, depending on what backed the currency. By 1860, an estimated 8,000 different state banks were circulating currency all over the country, engraved with images like laborers, farmers, bare-chested women, ships, trains, statesmen, and mythical figures. Of the thousands of images engraved on American money, only the 13 Confederate states chose to engrave images of slaves on their currency. Now, the very first note that any African Americans appeared on was this note here. From 1820. And it really shows no hint of subjugation or anything. Blacks and whites seem to be sort of working in a sort of congenial atmosphere. There's no apparent suggestion of subjugation, no hint as to the African Americans existing as property of another. This is the painting that I did from that note. Now, I don't know what this big old red baby means in the middle here, but it's been suggested that they were babysitting or something. And I actually downsized them a little bit from the original note. For the next 30 years, there were no records of slaves on paper money, but by the 1850s, the northern states began seeing slavery as a primary component of the Southern agenda. Southerners began seeing the North as a threat to a way of life sanctioned in Scripture. Subsequently, slaves became a constant feature on American paper money. The demand for their depiction came about quite suddenly, a part of the growing importance of the slavery question at the time. When the election of the anti-slavery Republican candidate for president, Abraham Lincoln, the Southern states decided they had to take drastic action in order to protect their own interests. On December 20th, 1860, a secession met in South Carolina and adopted an ordinance of secession from the Union. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas quickly followed suit. And this is the example of a recycled image here. Take a look at this guy with the corn in the upper right corner. He's white there, but on the note below that, from Virginia, they've taken his clothes and changed him, tattered his clothes and changed him into a slave. And this is typical of what they were doing during that period. They simply recycled other published images of whites on paper money and literally painted them black. And this is the painting that I did from that note. Now, a lot of people say you kind of look like a pimp here. I had to get some faces because the image is so small with the money. I had to get faces from neighbors from around the neighborhood. So that's why he's all looking like a pimp. All of this may be quite amusing to some of us, but this was very serious business to the Southern bankers who ordered the paper money. On this next note, slave overseer, take a look at the guy on the horse and the guys in the background in the wheat field. But on the note below that, it's the same guy on the horse, but the middle ground has been changed. Instead of being a field full of wheat farmers, it's now a field full of slaves. We only retouched the middle ground. The white workers have been replaced by slaves, and they are picking cotton and harvesting wheat. Having been called God by the demand for such images, and this is the painting that I did from that on paper money, the engravers now moved from recycling images to creating custom engraved images that reflected the views of the Southerners. During the second phase, they started using real enslaved Africans. And this particular one is this guy here from Georgia And the image we're talking about is one on the left side. Most of the images of slavery revolved around agriculture, and with agriculture, cotton was king. And this is the painting that I did from that one. Currency from the Deep South can take us through the entire experience of the enslaved Africans and the cotton crop that bonded them. Slaves harvesting cotton. That's that one. This is what slave harvesting cotton. On the next image, slaves carrying cotton. And this is the image on the left side of that. Notice they have George Washington on the note to kind of give it a little bit of legitimacy. And this one is from Alabama. And this image on the left side of the note, and I put it on the cover of my book because this image was used over 30 different currencies. Notice her features. Even though she's the female, emphasized the strength necessary to do the work of a man. That's why they made her look kind of masculine. And here's the painting that I did from that one. This is the one that's on the cover of my book, which, by the way, is out of print, unfortunately. But there will be a sequel coming up. Slaves loading cotton. And this is the image in the middle of this note. We have loading cotton onto wagons, being ready to transport it to different places all over the country and the world, as a matter of fact. And this is the painting there, this is that one. Slaves herding cotton bales. And this is notice from Charleston, South Carolina. Notice the cotton crop privately displayed beside the road so that the viewer was sure to get the point. While cotton dominated, slaves were also used. This is one from loading a ship. This is slaves loading a ship. And this is also from Charleston, South Carolina. And here again they have George Washington. They're loading the ship, getting ready to take the shipment to Europe. While cotton dominated, slaves were also used for harvesting tobacco. And this is the image on the left side of this note. Catering food. Now, the image in the middle of this note was adopted from a painting that hangs at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. One of the guys standing with his hand out like that, pointing at the table, was supposed to be Francis Marion, the swamp fox. Grinding tools. And this is from a place called Hamburg, South Carolina. It's somewhere down there, Augusta, Georgia, I'm told. Now, some of us may be old enough to remember this. I've certainly done it before. Say, butchering hogs. What they do, they butcher the hog and then they put him in that big old hot, big barrel of hot water and scald all of his hair off of him and then scrape it all off. And then they begin to continue to butcher the hog, and it was a neighborhood kind of thing. Everybody got involved in it, and everybody got some of the meat, some of the chitlins and all that good stuff. Ham hocks, pig feet. Hossain sugar cane. And this note from Tennessee. That's the painting that I did from that one. And this next one, slave factory workers. And this is the only known images of slave in an industrial environment. And the reason for that was that Southerners were worried that if slaves proved to be intelligent enough to operate machinery, it would be difficult to justify keeping them in bondage. Now the third phase of slaves on paper money continued the depiction of slaves in agricultural pursuits, but more so as a propaganda tool. The images were increasingly characterized by smiling workers and well-dressed blacks in happy scenes. The thinking was that even though the notes were issued in the South, they also circulated throughout the country. The new images were designed to reinforce Southern convictions about the legitimacy of enslaved labor and to convince Northerners that the slaves were treated humanely. And this one is called Slave Boy. He's smiling and happy. Surely he must be enjoying his work, and just as surely that work must have been beneficial to him. He was specially created by God to pick cotton. Slaves picking cotton. And this one, you notice again, George Washington is prominently displayed. The guy on the right here is smiling and happy. He got into singing as he performs his task and carries the huge overflowing baskets of cotton. Again, no hint of the task has been forced upon him. Slaves carding cotton. And here again it's the same note, but on the other side of the note. He's just happily moving along there with his horses. He's got his pipe in his mouth. He'd be getting in trouble otherwise. Or so the thinking was. And this next note, slave mother and child. The mother smiles at her laughing toddler who is playing with a tiny ball of cotton. It keeps both of them enslaved. Note the painful hypocrisy of portraying a happy mother and child when a system that routinely separated families and sold children. Slaves are loading the ship. It's from an antebellum Alabama banknote. I've kind of color-coded the painting in red, white, and blue to expose the connection between slavery and the United States flag. On the riverboat, slaves are loaded, and the country's fledgling transportation industry exemplified by boat, train, and wagon. One notes that the U.S. government, not just the South, benefited from slavery and supported the institution from the nation's beginning until the Civil War. Now, I'm particularly intrigued by this next image, slave profits. And it is one of the images that I changed the most. I deliberately painted her as a woman of mixed race to emphasize the sexual exploitation of black women that also expanded the numbers of the slave caste. It shows the Roman goddess of money, Moneta, holding a cotton plant as bags of gold spill open at her feet. And in the background, an overseer on a horse supervises a field of slaves as a train arrives to pick up the harvest. This image really sums it all up. The slaves are doing the work, and she's got the money. According to historian Francis Latimer, people think about slavery as this complete package that just came to evil land owners. Well, it didn't quite happen that way. It happened one law at a time, one person at a time. A historian that was interviewed by the New York Times for an article on this exhibition claims that the banks and artists were not so much making a grand statement about slavery as they were simply depicting their world. Well, this is quite contrary to the way these slave images have evolved. My research shows that a lot of the images were adapted from published images of whites on American paper money. They were very deliberate on what the slave images were meant to portray. Now, how can this exhibit of paintings extracted from old slavery time currency affect us today? Viewers of the exhibit, both black and white, have reacted with astonishment at the historic importance of African American slave labor to the economic development of the South in the United States depicted in these paintings. The invention of the cotton gin in 1793 resulted in the dramatic escalation of slavery. With the cotton gin, one slave could clean 50 times as much cotton in a day as he could clean by hand. By the 1830s, the United States was the #1 cotton exporter in the world. These paintings clearly document the importance of cotton and slaves to the American economy. This new level of public understanding generated by the exposure to these slave paintings and engravings will help to determine the outcome of important current issues related to African Americans. The paintings help to create a more enlightened public opinion on the much debated question of whether the United States owes and should pay reparations to African Americans for centuries of past slavery and racial discrimination that have unjustly benefited and prospered this nation. If there were ever a visual smoking gun proving what slavery did for America, these paintings taken from Confederate currency are it. Other issues include halting continued discrimination and high incarceration rates for blacks that threaten re-enslavement and basic freedoms. Renewed efforts to turn back the clock and rehabilitate the Confederacy confront us today. Flying the Confederate flag in public places at state expense. I know a little bit about that because we did that in South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina. Filling public libraries shelves with works that proclaim that the South was right or that slavery never existed except as a myth. Reasserting that the war between the states, the Civil War, was fought for states' rights and Southern nationalism, not over slavery, and recruiting a small cadre of misguided blacks to support these ideological views. Some African American scholars interviewed about this exhibition have even questioned the effectiveness of the Color of Money exhibition and have stated that they do not understand why I resurrected these images from the slavery period to present day discourse. My answer is simply this: without this exhibition, this symposium, or this talk we're having here now with my esteemed colleagues in Columbus, Ohio, may not have been possible. These futile actions based upon psychological warfare aimed at propagandizing the world into a renewed acceptance of the discredited premises on which the defunct Confederacy was built. Yet, ironically, without the preservation of the Confederate currencies, this story would have remained undiscovered. The paintings exhibit no bitterness concerning their origins. In fact, they appear quite appropriately dispassionate. The exhibit gains its power from the multitude of memorable images of slaves, however humble, minds set on freedom, working for America for free. These paintings reveal the many multifarious contributions of African Americans to the economy of the South and the United States during slavery. Some people may ask the question, do these paintings implicitly beautify, glorify, justify, or ratify the evil institution of slavery as did the original engravings? I say absolutely not. The paintings inform us about the resilience of our African American ancestors and how, despite supposed powerlessness, they overcame slavery. Through undying faith in God and nature, persistent mentally and physically strengthening hard work, the constant development of their individual talents and skills. When I paint these slave engravings, I see the strong and indomitable character of the slaves, the will to survive and carry on the qualities that they brought with them from Africa in the form of music, religion, storytelling, art, agriculture, architecture, and culinary traditions. The exhibition that traveled throughout the country consisted of about 60 paintings paired with the Confederate currency, has been featured in more than 500 newspapers all over the country, to include the New York Times, CNN, Time Magazine, NPR, ETV, and on and on and on. That basically concludes my little speech. I have often said that I thought I'd be known for something one day, but never in my wildest dreams did I ever think it would be Confederate money. But it has been, and I'm more than pleased that it has been a part of my life. If there are any questions, I take a few at this time. Yes.
I'm Dr. Arvind Kumar. I'm from University of Delhi, India. So that's very inspiring work that you showed with us. My only question: do you also work presence of slaves in Asian context, and you compare with American context?
I haven't yet, but I'm still working on it. Yes.
Thank you so much. I think this was really so insightful, and I think the exhibition is very interesting as well. So I'm so glad that it was able to come here. I was wondering, in your research, when you were looking at these currencies, in the kind of second phase that you mentioned, when they're actually creating the images, not just recycling them, did you find any information about who the artists were that were creating those images?
Yes, I've been asked that several times. Back during that time, a lot of the old plates and the pieces of information that was created to create these things have been lost through time. Just recently, they found some plates in the bottom of the river, and yeah, and they got them out of there. But a lot of it has been kind of lost. Who actually did the actual engravings on these notes? I wish I could tell you, but I've been asked and I've been looking, but I haven't found out who actually did the actual engravings for these, because they were being commissioned by banks and other institutions to create these things, like modern day photographers. They were given a job and they went out and did it and they got their money for it, and I guess that was the end of that. Now, I'm sure that information exists somewhere and I'm still looking for it. Any other questions? Yes.
Just to follow up on what you just said, I'm wondering if some of the engravers might not also be the same people who were doing the engravings for the newspapers in the South in that period, because very often in that period newspapers were illustrated with engravings. And I would think that those would be the available people who had those skills in the community, and there you might find some names of some of the artists.
That's quite possible. That's a good idea. I'll check it out. Yes.
Because the notes did not have color, what made you choose some of the coloring, the brightness? Of some of
Well,
the
I did that deliberately to try to, draw people in so they could see the experience, to bring it back to life. And obviously I couldn't use the old vignettes the way that they look, because they were kind of gray and dark and very small. So I used a lot of color to try to draw people in so they could actually look at the notes and realize what was going on. And I did use acrylic paintings to do these paintings with. I've been working with acrylics for many, many years. I didn't start doing this yesterday. Yes.
I just think it's fascinating. I'm director of the museum in Granville, which is about a 45-minute drive from here. But when I saw the postcard for this program, I was very excited to be here. My background actually is in Asian art rather than American art, but there's just something about the idea of your project and what you did that I just found really intriguing. I think listening to you tonight made me think about the fact that, African Americans had no control over how they were represented on these films. So they had no voice in this imagery, which makes me reflect on the kinds of images that are so prevalent in popular culture today, and how interesting it might be to sort of turn a critical lens on who's producing what and why and what are the motivations, and to what degree have African Americans sort of reclaimed the ability to have control over their public presentation, their public image.
Absolutely, and that's very important, because we had very little control back then, and it seems we don't have very much control these days, but we do have a black president. I'm working on another series of the same imagery, and I have found a lot more notes that I didn't have before, and instead of putting the money juxtaposition from the paintings itself, I'm actually incorporating the money into the painting now. So just like they make movie sequels, well, I'm gonna make a sequel. Yes.
Have you come across any numbers that would indicate the production of some of these bills at the time? Like, were they made in the hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands maybe?
Well,
any ideas on that?
When the Confederate states were issuing currency, I would imagine it was in the hundreds of thousands. But banks and institutions and smaller institutions were probably not doing a whole lot of that. A lot of these images were printed up north from the northern security printers, and the images were sold to the bankers down south. So I guess that your answer is, I'm not sure, but I would think that the ones that were represented by the Confederate states would have printed many, many more than just the private institutions. Because a lot of these notes, when they were printed by these private institutions, the further you got away from that institution, then the less likely they were going to accept it, because the population wasn't as mobile as they are now. But the Confederate states money was issued all over the country, and they were honored by the Confederacy. Any other questions? Well, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I want to thank Tammy for having me here, and all of the people that have put the exhibition together. Thank you very much.
also, if you would like a gallery card and have Mr. Jones sign them, we will have some up front. If I could have some students, and then Quentin and Mrs. Stokes Brown, if you could come up too. I want to take a couple of pictures. But thank you so much for sharing your story and your pictures with us. And I hope that everyone can join us for the reception downstairs and have some one-on-one time to talk to Mr. Jones more in depthly. So thank you so much. If you would like a card, I'm going to leave them up front. So please just grab one and go have a marker to sign. If you're here for a class and you're to check in with me for extra credit, please check in with me at the end. Thank you.
Students, photo op, don't be shy. Could be in the magazine. She would have had it. Right. Yeah, she would have she takes How do we turn these back on?
Oh, there we go. One last one.
All right. If I can have some students. I'm just gonna come over and grab you guys then. Some students. Come on up front. Yes, thank you. Come on.
Your parents might be excited to see you in the magazine. Who knows? It's proof that you go to school here.